Coming up on Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
On Brexit, Leavers thought we were for Remain and Remainers thought we were for Leave.
Never work with animals or children, as the old saying goes. Well, it's not one I agree with, because today on Chopper's Brexit Podcast, I've asked students from St George's School in Harpenden, Hertfordshire, to the Red Lion pub. We are always being told that young people think this or that, but it always strikes me as amusing that it's often older people speaking on behalf of younger people who say that. So today on this student special, I'll be opening the floor to sixth formers and having them tell me exactly what they think, or what they want to know from our guests. We'll be speaking to former Labour Shadow Cabinet Minister and former Labour leadership candidate Liz Kendall, journalist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn, and Conservative peer Matthew Ridley. But before all that, after we saw a sweep of Tory MPs take traditionally Labour seats in the north of England in last month's general election, I want to know how things have changed for MPs in those northern seats and what the blue wave means for Brexit. So here to tell me just that is Northern Powerhouse Minister Jake Berry. He's been Tory MP for Rossendale and Darwen in Lancashire since 2010. He's from Liverpool, like me, and he voted to remain in the 2016 referendum. Oh, and he's got quite possibly the most beautiful dog in Westminster. Jake Berry, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Podcast. How is Lola?
Lola is okay. My large black standing poodle. I just think there's a bit of competition now with Dylan in Downing Street. That could be a match made in Tory paradise. The Lola Dylan show, where they could have a weekly podcast.
I'm trying to...
It'd make a bit more sense, I think.
I'm trying to imagine the puppies. It's kind of hideous, actually, because Lola's a massive Labradoodle and Dylan's a terrified terrier.
How dare you? She is a standard poodle.
Sorry, it's an enormous great dog, though. But well, welcome to the podcast, Jake, again. I mean, it's been an extraordinary month for your party last month, isn't it? You really have got this new blue wall of MPs in the north of England, which is going to be helpful towards the next election.
Well, I mean, we often talk about things as being a sort of, seismic shift in politics, but the last general election really felt like that. You had places like Haywood and Middleton that have never elected a Conservative MP, electing Chris Clarkson, a brilliant new colleague, Penistone and Stocksbridge electing new colleagues across South Yorkshire. I mean, that is not normally a popular place for Conservatives to be elected, but Miriam Cates is a brilliant member of Parliament. This is genuinely something new, and I think this blue wall that we're talking about is a significant new movement in British politics, and it's been delivered by Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister, and he just has that, I think they call it relatability in some circles, but he just has that ability to make people support what he is doing.
Which is
they
amazing.
Really believe he's genuine, that's great because he is.
Old Etonian, quite well off, smart, Telegraph journalist, and yet he's relatable to the north of England. Go discuss that one.
Yeah, no, I mean, he just has that cut through. In fact, when I went to Penistone and Stocksbridge before the general election, of course, lots of these new MPs I've known for a considerable period of time. As my work as Northern Powerhouse Minister, we have been sort of fighting together on the domestic agenda, supporting, Darlington Council, which we recently took control of. Peter Gibson, he and I have been working on the plans for transforming Darlington Town Centre, regardless of any election. I've known lots of them for some time, but I went to Penistone and Stocksbridge to meet Miriam Cates with our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. It was extraordinary. People were pouring out on the streets, following both of us round. I don't think they were really following me, but I was there. And having selfies taken with them. I don't think we can remember a politician who's been doing that, in our generation, Chris.
And the party's centre of gravity has moved 200 miles north. It was, London, because the home counties were the more main Tory base, but the party's now moved north. And of course, you're moving a big chunk of CCHQ, your central offices, to the north. Where would you like that to be? Birmingham or Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool?
I mean, I think it needs to be next to a really high-quality university, because I think certainly what we want to do is to get those brightest and best graduates, particularly so many elections now are fought on the basis of data. We need high-quality data analysts, and we just want the best people working for the party in its headquarters. So, I mean, places that jump out to me, Leeds has a fantastic university. Manchester, there's the greatest university in the world, Sheffield University, which I am an alumnus. But I think that will do something different because, ultimately, people get up in the morning, they go to work, they work in central office, they sit at their computer screen, they think about campaigns, they think about how we can reach out to people and work with them on their ambition for their lives. And if you get up in Sheffield and do that, or you get up in Manchester or Liverpool or Leeds and do that, you just have a different world
you're
view.
breathing the air and
you
you're
have
in
a different world view than if you're getting up in somewhere in London and sort of traipsing into SW1. I think it really will change the party for good. I massively support it, and I think it does need to be in the north.
If this isn't to be a flash in the pan, you need to show the people in the north of England that you are delivering for them by 2024 when the next election happens. That means spending heavily now on infrastructure. Why don't you start maybe HS2 in the north and the south, for example?
Well, I think actually we need to move a bit quicker with HS2. I mean, people often say, why don't you start HS2? But that's massively long-term. These large infrastructure projects, just like, Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, delivered Crossrail in London on time and on budget, certainly when he was in charge.
Not latterly, but yeah.
Well, I wouldn't like to comment on the new Mayor of London. But, these long-term infrastructure projects, they take a very long time before people actually see a change in their lives. And if you go around, as you and I have done in the past, and talk to people on our sort of travels, they want intra-city connection rather than inter-city connection. So is it hugely important we connect up Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield and the Tees Valley and Hull? Yes, absolutely. But if you work in Leeds or you work in Manchester, you want a really good and reliable bus service. You want a tram train solution.
Between those cities, rather.
Not really between those cities. You live in a suburb of Greater Manchester or even just up the road where I live in Lancashire. It can take you 2 hours to get to Manchester in a car. We want, high quality tube and bus. I mean, although we won't mirror that, but that sort of quality of transport infrastructure in the north of England, so we can super connect businesses with communities of highly skilled and ambitious people. And we can do that much quicker. And HS2 isn't going to fix that. But, shorter term commitment to wider transport infrastructure will make a faster difference to people's lives than these big ticket projects. I really support these big, on a personal level, I think we should do them as well.
You support HS2?
Yeah, on a personal level, I think HS2 is important. I wouldn't want to prejudge the review. But if I had to sort of pick my winner, it would certainly be Northern Powerhouse Rail. East-West connectivity, which the Prime Minister has committed to, and we committed to in our manifesto, is a lot more important to us across the north of England than getting to London slightly quicker. The fact that it's, takes you longer to go from Hull to Liverpool. I mean, almost you could go to London and back in that time period. That is the challenge we need to grapple with and fix.
Brexit happens in just over 2 weeks' time. Why is the government so nervous about marking it with Big Ben's bongs or fireworks or anything, really? Not just the government, but also Parliament. The establishment seems nervous about Brexit. Why?
Well, I mean, first of all, the decision about whether Big Ben bongs or not is a decision for Parliament, not the government. And, I applaud the crowdfunding website that's been set up. I want to hear Big Ben bong on Brexit Day or Brexit night, whatever it may be. Yes. I think that's really important. It is an event of national significance. We're, of course, issuing coins to mark the event. We will be doing other things. And I'm really looking forward, is the Daily Telegraph going to have a big Brexit party?
Well, interesting, Jake. Thanks for mentioning that. We are going to have a Choppers Brexit lock-in for Telegraph subscribers, but you're welcome to come along, of course.
Is it a free bar, Chris?
It's a free bar.
Come on.
Well, for about half an hour,
Yeah.
Now, listen, these sixth formers have some great questions for you. They've been preparing them and working out what to ask. Any questions?
I'm Megan. I was just wondering what plans are in place for HS2 to guarantee that it won't just be the South cherry-picking Northern talent and to guarantee that the North will prosper as a result of HS2.
Good question.
Megan, that is an extraordinary question, and thank you for it. I mean, better connecting our nation, whether we do it east-west across the north of England or the Midlands or north-south between London and the rest of the country, just helps our economy grow. It's actually good for everyone. I like to regard HS2 as a fast lane for getting to the north from London. Infrastructure, I'm just a big believer in infrastructure because it just drives our economy. Now, how do we stop young people like yourselves making that decision to, my first job is going to be in London, so I'm going to jump on an HS2 or an East Coast or a West Coast mainline train and go to London and get that job? We crack that by creating highly paid, secure jobs in the north of England. Because anyone who has ever lived or worked in the north knows that in terms of quality of life compared to London, the ability to buy a home, the access to open green spaces or national parks, you cannot trump living in the north in terms of quality of life. So what is that drag pulling people to London. It's those highly paid, highly secure jobs, and we are about creating that across the north of England. To me, that's really what the Northern Powerhouse is about. We talk about this bounce rate, people going to university in the north because it's a brilliant place to live and then deciding to come and work in London. We're going to tackle that. But part of it is, yes, as you say, putting that infrastructure in. So if you take your first job in Manchester and you live in somewhere in Greater Manchester, you need the visibility that if my next job is in Liverpool or in Leeds, I don't have to move house and move my family. I've got that ability to move around the north of England like I can do if I live in London.
Okay, next question.
How do you think Boris won over people in the north who had not voted Conservative before? And do you think they'll remain Conservatives in the next election?
Well, the first thing to say is I don't think it was all about Brexit. I think if you go around and talk to people, as I do every single week, there is real excitement about our domestic agenda and this idea that we can level up all of the wealth and prosperity across our country. Look, Brexit was a big factor. I'm not sort of belittling it anyway, but it was a much broader victory than that. And I think there's a whole generation of people living in some of those towns that I was talking about earlier who really think that the Labour Party's lost touch with them. It's become a very metropolitan, sort of academic, sort of London-focused party and doesn't really have a voice that connects with people in the north of England. I think Boris got that cut through. He spoke in a way and sort of, plain sort of language about his ambition for everyone who lives wherever they are in this country. And the people grabbed that with both hands and voted Conservative, you say, for the first time. Now, will it stick? My view is probably yes, because I think people have made the hardest decision now, which is go from lifelong Labour voters to Conservative voters. For many of them, they stopped in the middle of the European election by voting Brexit, but they have made that transition. I think, yes, it will stick. But if and only if we deliver on all the other things that we've been talking about, which is about, increasing people's standard of living, investing in the north of England, making, things that change lives. And when I talk to people, they don't think that the biggest challenge they've got in their life is that HS2 isn't whizzing them to London 5 minutes faster. They say, my car failed its MOT yesterday. I need 200 quid to buy 4 new tyres for my car. And if I don't do that, I can't take my kids to the nursery, I can't drop them off at school, and I can't go to work. How do we fix that? Well, we make sure that they have secure, highly paid jobs, given that relief from the pressure they're feeling for cost of living. To me, that's how we make them stick with the Conservatives, and that's about wide prosperity.
Who do you fear most on the Labour leadership candidates? There's 5 of them now, 4 women and a bloke. Who do you fear most? I just don't, look, a bit of a dodge, but I don't think we know enough about them. What I fear, if I fear anything, is the Labour Party coming up with a compelling narrative that appeals to all the regions of our country. And they have, absolutely failed to do that in the last election. And from where they are today, I think it's really difficult for them to sort of pivot back to a much more sort of appealing message. I think their membership is very much in and of the left. I think they're a very metropolitan party. I think the electorate has moved on and Labour has failed to follow. So whoever their leader is, I suppose the thing that Conservatives should fear is that they change that. I think that's going to be very difficult to do. When
you've got 500,000 members who are sort of bought into the sort of Corbyn project and Corbynism, I think it's quite hard to move that quickly. So I think that's the big challenge for them. And I think also they've missed the boat to a large extent because, this victory across the north of England wasn't in a 6-week election campaign. Quite a lot of it, the praise for it should be laid at George Osborne's. Remember him? He's now an editor of your local paper. But
standard. His idea was Northern Powerhouse, wasn't it?
But also the sort of kernel of the idea of Northern Powerhouse was this creating this equality of opportunities. I think people can see that is starting to be delivered. There's a lot more to do, and you've seen a sort of process of very good Conservative victories. I mean, back when Ben Houchen won in the Tees Valley, I could almost say that is the foundation stone.
He's a Metro Mayor
of the Blue Wall. He is the Metro Mayor up in the Tees Valley, and that transfer of power, money, but crucially, I think agency over their own lives is really what people are into. And the Labour Party is currently all about centralisation and taking power back into London.
What's your advice to these young people, Jake, before you go, about Brexit? Because it seemed to be, certainly amongst the Snapchat I've been monitoring with my daughter, they appear to think that Brexit's a disaster.
So look, my advice would be this. Go and visit our home city of Liverpool. and go to the historic Pierhead. Look at the Liver building, the Cunard building, and you will see those buildings turn their beautiful facades not back in on the city. In fact, the side of them which faces the city is extremely plain, but out to sea. Because Liverpool as a city, arguably the first ever global city, knew that success was about looking out to the world, showing your best face and being opening and welcoming. And to me, that's what Brexit is about. It's about Britain not turning its back on anyone. It's about opening ourselves to the world. And I think for people in your generation, that is a hugely exciting opportunity. So I think you are, perfectly placed to, be that ambassador for Britain, that global Britain idea, and have hugely successful careers.
Wow, no pressure.
And you'll have a great night out in Liverpool as well. So even if you can't find the Cunard and the Liver building, they're really easy to spot. You'll have a great night out.
Please show your appreciation for Jake Berry. Now, before the Telegraph really started reporting Brexit, and long before the birth of this podcast, there was a national newspaper running a campaign which at the time seemed frankly mad. In 2011, the Daily Express launched a campaign to get the UK out of the EU, much to the bemusement of journalists, lobby colleagues, and the vast majority of MPs. But 10 years later, Brexit, the goal of that campaign, is actually happening in 2 weeks' time. And the man behind that campaign, I would argue the most successful newspaper campaign in British journalistic history, former Express journalist and later UKIP MEP Patrick O'Flynn, joins me now. Patrick, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
Hello.
And Patrick, you brought with you a 24-page insert into the Daily Express dating from January 2011, talking about its headline, Special Edition, Get Britain Out of the EU, it's free of charge. And on the front, you've got the Express Crusader saying, we demand our country back. And page 3, you've got some kind of beefcake chap looking like Richard I, stabbing loads of letters, it looks like, you've been sent in from readers demanding that Britain leaves the EU. And on page 2, there's a letter from Peter Hill there to the reader. And its headline, Why We Must Break Free from the EU Dictatorship, which is pretty clear what it stands for, which seemed mad at the time.
Well, it seemed eccentric to a lot of my lobby colleagues who thought I'd perhaps lost the plot a little bit.
Describe this front page.
What I've brought along today, and it's the only copy I've been able to find at home, so I won't give it to you. But this is a special edition we brought out about 6 weeks after we began the campaign. And it's full of articles by such luminaries as Norman Tebbit, Nigel Farage,
Patrick O'Flynn,
yours truly, Leo McKinstry. And I think we distributed more than 1 million copies across the country.
Yeah.
And
free copy.
Yeah. And it really kind of underlined how serious we were. And I should say, it wasn't just lobby colleagues who were bemused.
That's journalists, you mean, don't you?
Yes, journalists. I actually bumped into the editor of another national newspaper shortly after we launched this, a Eurosceptic newspaper as well, who said, very interested in the campaign. I'm sure the readers will love it, sort of a bit of small talk. And then he turned to me as he was walking off and went, of course, it will never happen. And I just thought, even then I thought, we're going to get close on this campaign, because it really grew out of the Lisbon Treaty, where we were promised a referendum, particularly by David Cameron, no ifs, no buts. And the referendum wasn't forthcoming. And the Lisbon Treaty gave the EU a legal personality of a state. It abolished some national vetoes. And it was in the long line of treaties from Maastricht, Nice, Amsterdam, which kind of concentrated more sovereignty with Brussels, and each time the British establishment had avoided giving the people a choice. And the Lisbon Treaty was swiftly followed by a Eurozone crisis, and suddenly the idea that Britain needed to be in the EU for economic reasons, and we were the sick man of Europe, and they were the powerhouse, that began to fall apart. Yeah. So the conditions had changed, and I knew there was a big appetite to revisit this question.
I was struck by there's a group called Better Off Out by about a dozen Tory MPs were in that group, weren't they?
Yes.
But when he launched this, it was a tiny thing. I mean,
even the likes of Bill Cash weren't declared.
No, they wanted to reform the EU. They weren't better off out. I did a search on Factiva, for the word Brexit. And in 2014, there was 853 mentions of the word Brexit, that word Brexit, in all of journalism in Britain. And by last year, it was 600,000. So it just shows, I think to a degree, Brexit it's just come from nowhere to dominate. I mean, the mentions of the NHS by comparison, the other single biggest national obsession, was a third of that. Any questions here from the student? There's one here.
I'm Victoria. Given the shortage of unskilled and semi-skilled labour in many parts of the UK and our reliance on workers from the EU to do this work, shouldn't the preservation of freedom of movement be a critical priority in the Brexit debates?
Well,
great question.
Victoria,
That's the key question.
I completely disagree with that. You say there's a shortage of semi-skilled and unskilled labour. I don't know how many of you are also doing economics, but there's a market clearing mechanism, and the way you tackle labour shortages is the price of labour for that particular occupation is allowed to rise, i.e. people can earn a decent living again. And I think a lot of it is big employers being used to very cheap labour, and to use a slightly Marxist phrase, there's this unlimited reserve army of labour that can be imported in from the rest of the EU, particularly the low-wage Eastern European economies. But what we then have is sort of privatisation of profits, the big companies bringing in cheap labour, making profits, but a socialisation of costs, because you have things like tax credits and other welfare benefits which are accessible to the people coming in, subsidised housing and things like that. So the public realm is bearing the costs, working class communities are suffering, and the big companies are cleaning up. I would like to see a more balanced labour market where if there's a shortage of labour, perhaps wages have to rise. And I don't think that's anything other than progressive.
How are you marking Brexit night, Patrick O'Flynn? It's 10 years since you launched your campaign and suddenly you've blown the bloody doors off.
Indeed. I've been invited to a rather swanky party in Chelsea by some of the Vote Leave luminaries. So I'll probably see in the Brexit moment there. But then depending on how it's looking, what the weather's like, I may come down here either to Parliament Square or Trafalgar Square, I think might be an interesting place to
toast a new dawn.
Chime it in. Yeah.
Please show your appreciation for Patrick O'Flynn.
Thank you.
Right, don't go anywhere. In just a moment, I'll be joined by former Labour leadership candidate Liz Kendall, who will be telling me who she's backing to be the successor to Jeremy Corbyn. Right after this.
Hi, I'm Claire Newell. When I tell people I'm the Telegraph's investigations editor, they sometimes ask me if it means I'm a spy and have lots of disguises. And there is a bit of blending into the background, but generally I spend lots of time working with sources, piecing together evidence to reveal wrongdoing and hold the powerful to account. Our stories question, scrutinise and inform. But we can't do that without the support of our subscribers. Their contribution allows us to dedicate time to stories, such as our investigation into the allegations that Sir Philip Green had sexually and racially harassed staff. So if you'd like to support what we're doing and get unlimited access to the huge range of quality journalism on politics, sport, business, culture and more, head to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where you can get 30 days free access to the Telegraph online. And after that, it's just £2 a week.
Right, you're joining me back in the Red Lion pub for Chopper's Brexit podcast. Now, bubbling away behind the scenes in Westminster right now is the Labour leadership contest. The next leader and successor to Jeremy Corbyn will be announced on the 4th of April, and they will see the party through the crucial Brexit transition period. And one politician who has fought for the Labour leadership and has her own strong views on who that successor should be is Liz Kendall, who ran against Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership in 2015, and she quit the shadow cabinet following his election in September of that year. Liz, welcome to the Red Lion pub.
Thank you for inviting me.
Are you familiar?
I have been here a few times in my life,
Yes.
in my younger days, I must
but not,
I must admit.
Not more recently.
Not more recently.
But you got past the electorate last month. You
It was
returned.
a brutal election.
Yeah.
It was a really
brutal because of
election.
what? Because of the grimness on social media, or the Brexit uncertainty,
it
or
was
what?
very tough for to be honest. I came off social media really pretty much. It's not my favourite at the moment. But it was very tough because, I had, although I retained my seat, lifelong Labour voters, some in tears because they didn't feel they could vote for us. And it was very painful and difficult for them and painful and difficult for me and the team because I didn't get the sense of a great deal of enthusiasm for Boris Johnson, but people felt they might have to vote for him over the Labour Party they'd voted for all their lives.
Because of what reasons?
Because they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. They didn't believe that we could deliver everything that we promised. Huge amounts of spending.
Change.
And they just, one morning outside a school gate, I always do school gates to get to parents, on the morning that we'd announced the free broadband. And the parents, they were just laughing at us. And then I showed them my letter, which was, we want to expand childcare for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds and, stop the school cuts. Now that they could get, but also people didn't, trust us, on safety and security issues. And I just thought we couldn't take hard decisions, thought we were weak, indecisive. And they wanted someone who was strong. Somebody said, I just don't think you'll take the tough decisions. So
it's a character point about the leader.
Well, it's about, they didn't, on Brexit, Leavers thought we were for Remain and Remainers thought we were for Leave.
Yes.
And
that's for a reason, that part, that uncertainty at the top.
There's a whole bunch of things there. I actually think many of these problems started before Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn, but they were turbocharged by them. And that's why this leadership election is so important, because the Labour Party doesn't have a God-given right to exist. And unless we fundamentally
we'll come on
change...
to that shortly. I mean, I've been struck by the lack of contrition amongst people around Jeremy Corbyn, and I don't know what it's about. I mean, if I was... And you are cross, you're emotional, and I think rightly so, because people who vote Labour are stuck with the Tories for another nearly 5 years, and possibly another 5 years after that, given the scale of a landslide. There's not enough anger, I think, about what Labour didn't do last month.
I don't know. There's quite
You're
a lot
cross,
of...
but not the people around Jeremy Corbyn, I would say.
Well, I think it's hard when you really believe something, and you've waited all your life to get the opportunity to do this. It's very hard to think people didn't like this. And I know this because having gone through the leadership election myself and made arguments that were rejected by Labour Party members, I only got 4.5% of the vote. I cling on to that 0.5%. You have to reflect. And it's hard to think what you said people didn't like. Why? What's gone wrong here? But I think amongst the wider Labour Party and wider Labour movement, I am hopeful that people understand something has got to change, because we cannot let down. I don't mean to sound sort of OTT, but, doing my first surgeries, thinking we've got 5 more years of this. What am I going to do? What is the Labour Party doing for you? Nothing. So I think there are enough people who will think that we need to change, or that is what I have to hope.
And to change means appeal more to the middle ground, to maybe Telegraph readers because back in 97, Tony Blair was quite liked by the Telegraph readers.
Well, it's quite interesting.
Example.
We've had a lot of talk about... I think we should be appealing to the country as a whole.
That means moving the middle ground, doesn't it?
I think it means having a message that appeals as much to people where I grew up, in Watford, not far from Harpington, as it does to people in the so-called red wall seats like, Mansfield, in Wolverhampton. Because Labour wins when it has a coalition of working and middle-class voters in our liberal metropolitan cities and our so-called traditional town heartlands. It is a coalition. And we've only ever won when we've built that coalition. So I do want to win back the seats that we lost in 2019. Yeah. But we've got to win back the seats we lost in 2010. Otherwise, we're never going to be in government. So I think it's really important that we keep both those sets of people. And I sometimes think we overcomplicate politics because people in Watford and people in Mansfield and people in Sussex and Surrey want the same things. They want a great school for their kids. They want a place that is safe to grow up. They want to know if they get sick and ill, there's going to be a health service there for them.
But they're voting Tory.
They are, because they don't believe us. They don't trust us.
That's the problem. So of these candidates, Lisa Nandy, Keir Starmer, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Jess Phillips, Emily Thornberry, who are you supporting?
I have nominated Jess Phillips to be leader because I think she's the person who will be most bold about the kind of changes that we need. She's a fighter, and I've seen from the work that she's done that she's a sort of passionate champion for equality. But I've also nominated Ian Murray for deputy leader because I'm such a passionate believer in the union of the United Kingdom.
That's the big issue for the next 5 years.
It absolutely is. It's not just that we need to win back seats in Scotland in order to form a government, which we do. It's that I believe in unions, trade unions, the Union of the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Jess Phillips, you think?
I think she's got
First
bags
female leader of the Labour
of
Party.
experience outside politics and bags of guts and instinct inside politics. Instinct, you know this. Through all the maelstrom of politics and the ups and downs, what is someone's gut instinct on an issue? And that's really important because you can't change a person's gut instinct.
And the dynamic, I think, of her taking on Boris Johnson will be interesting.
Oh, it certainly would.
And,
she tells it like it is.
Box
and
office,
I
would
like
say.
that. Yeah.
Okay, any questions here from the students from St George's School, Harmden? I see a hand in the air there. Let's get a microphone to you.
I'm Caroline.
Hi, Caroline.
What do you think Labour needs to do to win back the seats in the North?
We had Jake Berry on this, Northern Powerhouse Minister, telling us why he thinks Tories can win those seats and more.
They have got to trust us with their money, believe that we will deliver what we say. We have got to make sure that we stop telling people we know all the solutions to their problems. I've always believed in giving people power and control to make decisions over their own lives rather than telling them that we know best. We've got to be patriotic. People have got to believe we will stand up for the country, that we love the country, and essentially have some trust that we can take difficult decisions. People aren't stupid. They know that you can't have everything you want whenever you want it. They know that there are choices to be made and priorities to be set, and probably respect you if you don't always promise the world. They want to know that we can really deliver and are prepared to take tough choices. And I think that is as important in seats in the North as it is in the Midlands, as it is in the South.
And getting past the word Brexit.
Yeah, that's, it's done. It's done now. I campaigned for a Remain. I wanted a vote on whatever deal was come up with.
You're
but
not
that
a
issue
re-entry
is
person,
done.
Liz?
I think that issue is done. I personally think it will not deliver all of the things that were promised. I would like to see us have as close a relationship with Europe as possible for jobs and trade. But the thing I am really bothered about that's got lost in the last 3 years, the underlying reasons why people voted for Brexit. I heard Patrick on earlier. There's no evidence that immigration is the thing that is reducing people's wages. There isn't. You are more likely to be treated by an immigrant in the NHS than stand behind them in a queue. And whilst Brexit is done, I'm not going to lie and tell people that it's going to solve all their problems, because it won't. But the issue here, and I want to admit this, for people like me who are from the progressive part of the Labour Party, we have not been good enough in making the arguments against nationalism and the populist policies of the right or the left. We have to give people real answers to their problems that they can believe in.
You mean you talk of yourself too much as a party? Or
No, I think that progressives, people like me, have not come up with a strong enough argument against why Brexit isn't the solution to the problems in the NHS. I take responsibility that I haven't been good enough.
Liz, before we wind up, what's your advice to these young people? They're on the edge of voting.
My advice to you is don't give up. Aim high. Anything that is worth having is worth fighting for, because nothing worthwhile in life comes easy. You will get knocks, and those of you who will do well will be the ones who have the grit to pick themselves up and have another go. That's the most important thing. Not people who just rise and rise and rise, but the people who struggle and fall and get back up. You need that grit and that determination. And to do that, you need a good team of friends and family and hopefully good teachers behind you to support you.
Liz Kendall, thank you so much. And finally, if you pay too much attention to the papers like I do, you could be forgiven for getting quite depressed about the prospects for the global economy and Britain. What with Brexit, the uncertainty, Iran, the concerns about the environment. But one Tory peer, Lord Ridley, has been saying recently that actually there are reasons to be cheerful. Life is getting better for most of us. Matt, welcome back to Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
Chris, it's great to be back on it.
You've got an audience of adoring fans.
Don't know about that, but it's an audience of some kind.
There's some excellent students here from St George's School, Harpenden, with questions to ask. I was really struck by your piece you wrote for The Sun on New Year's Eve about why there are reasons to be cheerful. I thought it was quite interesting, actually, and quite a different vibe to the kind of misery and gloom we see in some newspapers.
Yeah,
possibly.
well, 10 years ago, I wrote a book called The Rational Optimist, saying the world's been getting better, not worse, and it's going to go on doing so. And that was quite brave, because we were in the midst of a really nasty recession at that time, and everyone thought the world might be coming to an end. And actually, we've had a great 10 years as a planet and as a country. Because if you look at, for example, the number of people living in extreme poverty, it's halved in 10 years. That's extraordinary.
Across the world.
Across the world. Lifespan is increasing at the rate of about 6 or 7 hours per day.
Yeah.
So every day you live, you're likely to die 8 hours later or 7 hours later. Child mortality, the greatest measure of misery anybody can think of, is plummeting rapidly, even in Africa, which for a long time wasn't able to keep up with the falls in, child mortality stagnated in Africa in the 80s and 90s. It's falling really fast now. The poorest parts of the world are seeing really fast growth. And this isn't coming at the expense of the environment, because the number of people killed in floods, droughts and storms is going down very rapidly.
And we're getting more efficient at things, aren't we?
Well, that's
look at on this aluminium, you point about aluminium cans, for example.
Yeah, so Britain is using less stuff every year than it did before, even though it's got more people.
And that includes, I think, electricity, doesn't it? Because the light bulbs are now efficient.
We're using less electricity every year.
Getting more light from
LED
them.
lights use about 25% as much electricity as compact fluorescents did before them. But an aluminium can now weighs about 13 grams of aluminium, and it used to be 85 when it was first invented in the early 1960s.
That's a very precious metal.
That's a very good example of how we're dematerializing a lot of stuff. We're recycling steel, etc., etc. So actually, you know what? I think by the end of this decade, and particularly by the end of this century, we can have billions of people living pretty prosperous lives and having a smaller footprint on the planet than when there was...
Your phone here, I won't name the brand, but this mobile phone, it's tiny, the size of my palm. Now, back in the 70s, how big was the computer to drive that?
About the size of this pub.
So this pub... So look at that is so efficient.
But it's not just a phone. That's got everything that used to be on my desk. I mean, I use it instead of a pack of cards when I play Patience, which I don't do very often, you understand. I use it instead of a flashlight, a torch, sorry, what we say in the UK. It's got all my correspondence on it. I don't use very much paper anymore. Most people do. And by the way, a lot of wildlife is coming back too. Wolves are increasing all across the world. Even tigers are starting to increase again.
But we are cutting down the rainforest in Brazil, losing wildlife there.
At a slower and slower rate. And that's the really...
Not a quicker rate. I thought the reporting of that is that it's getting worse, the fires.
The fires around the Amazon were actually less last year than for a number of years. The general trend is down, but the amount of rainforest destroyed is going down. And in many countries, the amount of rainforest is now increasing. The amount of forest in the world is going up steadily. That's largely because northern countries are increasing their forests, but also quite poor countries are now doing it. Any country that gets above $5,000 a year GDP per capita starts to see an increase in forest cover. So Bangladesh, for example, is increasing forest cover all the time.
So that's reason to be cheerful. Is Brexit part of that progress or a regression?
It's part of that progress because it's part of Britain rejoining the world and not getting stuck inside a relatively small corner of the world economy, which is Europe, but reaching out to the rapidly growing parts of the world, which is Asia and Africa and the Americas, and being part of that, I think. Now, we've got to get it right. We could still turn inwards and turn Brexit into a disaster, but I don't think we will. I think this is about global Britain.
Okay. Now, with these young ones here, and they are the future, Matthew, and we are the past, but we accept that. Any questions from the audience here?
I'm Eliza. I was just wondering, do you think the UK will loosen its regulations on environmental habits and stuff to stay competitive with the EU?
So the Environment Bill was being published on Wednesday. Big moment. What will the Brexit mean for the environment?
Well, I wish we would change our regulations more on environmental issues as we leave, but not for a race to the bottom, but for a race to the top. So, for example, the EU's effective ban on gene editing has been an absolute disaster for the environment because it's meant we've relied on pesticides more and on gene-edited crops less. So, for example, potatoes need about 15 sprays a season to keep the fungicides off. Gene-edited potatoes are out there, but not in Britain, not in Europe. This would be a wonderful thing. We could get birds and
Why
bees
are they banning it? Is it because of farming interest in France or Germany or Spain? What's going on?
The European Court of Justice ruled that gene-edited crops must be treated draconianly with extremely intrusive regulation that effectively is a ban because it's so difficult to get approval that you would effectively, nobody's even trying. Whereas they ruled that crops produced by bombarding seeds with gamma rays are fine. They need no regulation at all. And we've been using those, by the way, for 30, 40 years. This is madness. You know, that's scrambling the genes randomly in the hope of finding a hopeful monster, whereas gene editing is precisely changing one
your point
bit.
about Brexit.
And by the way, Harpenden is where this happens. Rothamsted is the leader. Sorry. I'm
sure that's okay.
Am I getting carried away? Rothamsted is the leader in gene editing technologies in the UK, and it's got wonderful potential. And outside the EU, we can change the rules about that and say we're going for the green, better alternative than what the EU.
So we could be best in class on environment rather
Correct.
than the average in the EU. Okay, next question.
My name's Lauren, and I recently read a book about why the world is better than you think, and it talks about this thing called the gap mindset, about how we see the world as the West and the rest, and you talked about how countries in poverty have started to improve their standards of living. So do you think that leaving the EU will reimburse this mindset of us and the rest of the world?
Great question.
It's a very good question. And I think that Gap Mind book comes from Hans Rosling, and who's one of my heroes, sadly now dead, but he did this wonderful job of pointing out that the world's getting better. And one of the things he did, by the way, was ask 1,000 people, do you think extreme poverty has doubled, halved, or stayed the same in the last 20 years? And 65% of people in this country think that it's doubled. Now, if you ask a chimpanzee that question, by writing the answer on 3 bananas and throwing them to the chimpanzee and seeing which one it picked up first, it would get the right answer 33% of the time instead of 5% of the time. It would do 6 times as well as people at knowing about human society. That shows that our problem is not that we don't know what's going on, we know things that are wrong. But to your point about whether leaving the EU will have an impact on seeing us versus the rest, I think this is about us reconnecting with what used to be called the third world, the developing world, Africa and Asia, much more. We've on the whole biased our university recruitment and everything else towards EU countries in the last few decades. And I don't think we should. I think we should say anyone from wherever in the world can get here on merit, provided we control the numbers and people get here with money to support them and things like that.
Thank you.
Right, final question. Anybody else?
I'm Caroline.
Hi, Caroline.
Although you might not agree with the climate protests, do you believe that the youth getting involved is a good thing?
Yes, of course it's good for young people to get involved. But I really don't think it necessarily follows that extreme prognostications about climate that are well outside the scientific consensus, which most of Greta Thunberg's pronouncements are, and certainly Extinction Rebellions are, is helpful. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change gives forecasts based on scientific consensus of a range of possibilities for the future, which are roughly from harmless to harmful, but none of them are as bad as the kind of thing Extinction Rebellion is talking about. 6 billion people dying in the next decade or so, everybody eating their own children. This kind of stuff is bonkers. So it's very important to be open-minded and involve the youth, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out.
What would you say to Greta Thunberg? Because she's certainly a heroine for this generation. If she were here now in this audience.
I would say, Greta, let's have a chat. Come on, let's sit down. Let's go through the papers. You keep saying you're basing your ideas on science. Let's go through the scientific papers. What is your best estimate of climate sensitivity, Greta? Because I know mine is. I've looked at all the papers and read it, and I think it's about 1.5 to 2 degrees. What do you think it is? That's the amount of warming you get out of a doubling of carbon dioxide. The scientific consensus is that it's somewhere between 1 and 4 degrees. Fine, we can all agree on that. But the 4 degree estimate is looking less and less likely based on the latest science. let's have a conversation about that. Now, I suspect I'd end up talking to her dad, because he's the chap who writes most of her stuff, frankly. We now know. This has emerged through Facebook. Yes, no, it's been just the last couple of weeks.
Allegedly, actually, that's true.
No, at Facebook, it's turned out that actually most of her stuff is being written by her dad. I mean, she's not stupid. She can make up her own mind on things as well, but I do feel a little sorry for her, because I think she has been thrust into this and used to some extent by people who have a very much more sinister agenda.
On that note, please show your appreciation for Lord Matt Ridley. Thank you for coming on Choppers Brexit Podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Now, before we close this podcast, I want to make clear that Greta Thunberg has a public Facebook page. She posts to it from a private account, which is a father's account, and she always maintains that she writes those posts herself, not her father. Right, that's all we have time for today. Thank you to my guests this week, Jake Berry, Liz Kendall, Lord Ridley, of course, and Patrick O'Flynn. Thank you to the show's producers, Theo Luludis and Elliot Lampitt. And thank you, of course, to the students from St George's School, Harpenden, for making the effort to come along to the Red Lion pub and ask the best questions of all our guests this week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps other people find this podcast. A special thank you this week to Leicester's Lad, Rimo01, and Not On Your Nelly 71, who did just that. If you want to get in touch, you can find us on Twitter @Brexit Broadcast or email us choppersbrexitpodcast@telegraph.co.uk. And following our shout out last week for names of this podcast after Brexit, we've had some, interesting suggestions so far. Please keep emailing them in. We'll find a time in a future podcast to go through them all. Now, if you're all caught up on the podcast and fancy more world-class Brexit or political analysis, go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where you can find all the best Telegraph subscription deals. And in the show notes of this episode, I'm going to put a link to an article by Philip Johnson, who explained in the Telegraph this week why he thinks the chaos of the past year was caused not by Brexit, but by Parliament's inability to deliver on the result of 2016. Please give that a read, it's worth it. And finally, as I always say, don't forget to buy your copy of the Daily Telegraph. You won't regret it. Until next time, cheerio!
Hello there, Telegraph podcast listener. My name is Tom Gibbs and I'm the host of our Audio Football Club podcast. If your desire for top football chat isn't sated, then may I please recommend the Telegraph's very own podcast about that subject. Audio Football Club comes out every single Monday and it features some of the best and brightest football minds in the country, taking in all the biggest stories from the Premier League and around Europe. Search for Audio Football Club wherever you get your podcasts or follow the link in the description of this episode. Good things will happen to you if you do so.